40 years prior, another superstar had a commercial for Christmas Day.
Think Air Jordan this season. By Nike.
Now, as you know, the Caitlin Clark commercial aired during the football games on Netflix, aired during the basketball games on ESPN, ABC. The Nike commercial came at the perfect time as far as Christmas release goes. Yeah, of all the past commercials they've dropped over the last 5 to 10 years, this Caitlin Clark From Anywhere campaign seems to be the most creative that Nike has been.
This wasn't just another holiday ad drop. It looked like one at first glance, sure, but once you slow down and actually pay attention to the timing, the placement, and the contrast, it becomes clear this was something else entirely. Nike didn't just release commercials on Christmas Day. They made a statement about who they believe will define their future, and they did it in a way that most people missed because they were focused on the surface instead of the signal underneath. December 25, 2024 wasn't chosen because it was convenient or festive. That date carries weight. Exactly 40 years earlier, Nike aired Michael Jordan's first Christmas commercial, a moment that would quietly kick off the most profitable athlete-brand relationship in sports history. So when Nike rolled out a major campaign on that exact same day, the message wasn't subtle. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a declaration, the kind brands only make when they believe they're standing at the beginning of something much bigger. What makes this moment even more revealing is what happened alongside it. Two of the biggest names in the WNBA, both Nike athletes, both franchise-level talents, received holiday commercials. On paper, this should have been a celebration of parity, investment, and equal commitment. But when you put the two ads side by side, the difference isn't small. It's jarring. One feels like a carefully constructed legacy moment. The other feels like an obligation that needed to be checked off before the year ended. And that's where the real story begins. Because this isn't about who's better on the court, or who deserves more respect, or whose fans are louder online. This is about how power actually works behind the scenes. Brands don't tell you their priorities in press releases. They show you through budgets, creative risk, symbolism, and timing. And once you see how Nike played this hand, you can't unsee it. The question isn't whether they picked a side. The question is why they were willing to make it this obvious, and what that choice is going to change moving forward. December 25, 2024 wasn't just another holiday slot on the advertising calendar. For Nike, that date is loaded with history, and they know it. Brands like this don't move accidentally, especially not on days that already carry legacy. When they choose a moment like Christmas Day, they're not just chasing attention, they're anchoring meaning. And in this case, the meaning goes back exactly 40 years. On December 25, 1985, Nike aired Michael Jordan's first Christmas commercial. At the time, no one could have predicted what that moment would turn into. Jordan was still early in his career. The Air Jordan line hadn't yet become a global empire, and Nike was still proving itself as the dominant force it would later become. But that ad mattered. It placed Jordan at the center of a cultural moment, tied him to the brand's future, and quietly marked the beginning of a relationship that would go on to generate billions and reshape sports marketing forever. Fast forward 4 decades, and Nike returns to that exact same date, same holiday, same symbolic weight, same opportunity to send a message without ever saying it out loud. This wasn't about honoring history for nostalgia's sake. This was about creating a parallel. Nike was drawing a line from then to now, inviting anyone paying close attention to connect the dots. When brands repeat dates like this, they're not reminiscing, they're forecasting. That's what makes the timing impossible to ignore. Christmas Day is the biggest viewing day of the year for sports and entertainment. Families are gathered, TVs are on, attention is high. If Nike wanted maximum reach, they could have picked any major game or event. But choosing this specific date, with this specific history, signals intent. It suggests they believe the athlete tied to this moment isn't just relevant now, but foundational to what comes next. And once you recognize that, everything else starts to click into place. The production scale, the storytelling choices, the emotional callbacks, they all become part of a larger narrative Nike has used before. A narrative that says, we've seen this movie once already, and we think we know how it ends. But the date alone wasn't the full reveal. The real confirmation came when you looked at who else shared that holiday spotlight and how differently they were treated. On the surface, this should have been a straightforward story. Two elite athletes, same league, same brand, same holiday window. Nike had the perfect setup to showcase its commitment to women's basketball by elevating multiple stars at once. And if you only looked at the headlines, that's exactly how it was framed. But once you move past the branding language and actually study the execution, the symmetry disappears fast. Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson occupy rare air in the WNBA. One is a generational scorer whose influence has already reshaped viewership and attention. The other is a proven champion, a multi-time MVP, and one of the most dominant interior forces the league has ever seen. There's no serious basketball argument that diminishes either resume. That's important to establish because what follows has nothing to do with merit on the court. This is about how a corporation chooses to project value off it. Both athletes are signed to Nike. Both are positioned as cornerstones of the league. Both received holiday commercials during the same season. That alone suggests parity. But parity vanishes the moment you stop counting appearances and start examining investment. Production budgets, creative risk, narrative depth, distribution strategy. These are the areas where brands reveal who they're actually betting on. And the gap here wasn't subtle. One felt like an expansive, intentional, and deeply rooted in personal mythology. The other felt contained, safe, and strangely small for an athlete of that stature. Not because the player lacked star power, but because the brand chose not to build around it in the same way. And when that happens, it sends a message that goes far beyond a single commercial.
This is where fans started asking uncomfortable questions. If Nike publicly champions equality in investment and opportunity, why did these two ads feel like they came from entirely different creative universes? Why did one rollout feel like the opening chapter of a long-term vision, while the other felt like a moment designed to pass quickly without leaving a footprint? The answer isn't emotional, it's strategic. Nike didn't make a mistake here, they made a decision. And to understand what that decision really says, you have to look at each commercial on its own terms. Because once you do, the contrast becomes impossible to explain away. A'ja Wilson's position in the league isn't up for debate. She's earned her place through dominance, consistency, and championships. Multiple MVPs, a title, years of being the player teams have to scheme around. When an athlete with that resume gets a signature shoe and a major holiday commercial, the expectation is clear. This should feel momentous. It should feel like a celebration of everything she's built. That's why so many people were watching closely when Nike finally rolled out her spot. Leading up to the release, there had already been quiet tension around the timing of her signature shoe. Wilson herself had been open about wanting the rollout handled properly, and reports suggested there were frustrations behind the scenes about delays and execution. Nothing explosive, nothing scandalous, but enough for fans to sense that this moment mattered to her. This wasn't just another endorsement, it was supposed to be a milestone. Then the commercial dropped, and the reaction was muted. Not because it was offensive or poorly made, but because it felt surprisingly small. The concept centered around a familiar nursery rhyme, lightly rewritten to fit her name, layered over standard basketball visuals. There was no deeper narrative to pull you in, no moment that made you stop and think, no hook that lingered once the ad ended. It played, it passed, and it moved on. For an athlete of Wilson's caliber, that simplicity didn't read as minimalism, it read as missed opportunity. There was no broader campaign built around the idea, no phrase designed to travel beyond the screen, no challenge, no call and response, no cultural thread for fans to grab onto. It felt like a standalone piece created to fulfill a requirement rather than ignite a movement. And that's where the disappointment quietly settled in. Not loudly, not explosively, but unmistakably. This wasn't the type of creative effort you associate with a player who has carried a franchise and helped define a league. It looked like something that could have been conceptualized and completed quickly, without the layered storytelling or long-term vision that signals real belief from a brand. What made it harder to ignore was knowing this wasn't the only Nike commercial airing that day. Because while Aja's spot came and went, another campaign was unfolding at the exact same time, one that couldn't have felt more different if it tried. And once you see what that other athlete received, the quiet disappointment surrounding Wilson's ad starts to make a lot more sense. Caitlin Clark's commercial didn't feel like an ad you stumbled across. It felt like something you were meant to notice. The rollout alone made that clear. This wasn't tucked into a quiet time slot or limited to one platform. It aired during NFL games streaming on Netflix, NBA matchups on ESPN and ABC, placed directly in front of the largest possible audience on the biggest sports day of the year. That kind of exposure doesn't happen unless a brand is fully committed to making sure a moment lands. Then there was the production itself. This wasn't a quick shoot or a single location setup. Reports described weeks of planning, careful location scouting, and an intentional search for a setting that matched her origin story. The driveway wasn't random, it was symbolic, a visual callback to where her game was built, where the confidence to pull from deep was forged long before packed arenas and national broadcasts. Nike wasn't just selling an athlete here, they were selling a narrative. The scale of coordination was impossible to miss. A full residential block shut down, Nike vans lining the street, lighting rigs, camera crews, and production teams moving through a quiet neighborhood, while families inside watched it unfold from behind their blinds. High-profile names didn't just appear by chance. Travis Kelce, Jason Kelce, Travis Scott, Michael Che, college coaches, current coaches. Aligning those schedules alone is a logistical feat. That level of access signals trust, influence, and serious financial backing. Every frame was designed with intention. Background details referenced her AAU days. Jerseys weren't accidents. The opening shot wasn't chosen for aesthetics, it was chosen for meaning. This was storytelling on top of storytelling, built to reward viewers who followed her journey from the beginning, while still being instantly engaging to someone seeing her for the first time.
That's the difference between filling ad space and building a campaign. This commercial wasn't meant to exist in isolation. It was designed to live beyond its runtime, to be replayed, quoted, shared, and recreated. Nike didn't just highlight Clark's skills, they framed her as a central character in a long-term vision. And once you recognize that level of care, it becomes clear this wasn't just a strong commercial, it was an announcement. What truly separated this campaign from a standard commercial wasn't just the budget or the cameos, it was the idea at the center of it. From Anywhere wasn't a catchy line tossed in at the end of an ad, it was a concept engineered to travel. It captured exactly what makes Caitlin Clark different, distilled her identity into something simple enough to repeat and bold enough to challenge people watching from their couches. The phrase connects instantly because it mirrors reality. Clark's confidence to shoot from distances most players wouldn't even consider has been a defining part of her rise. Fans have seen it over and over again. Logo shots, deep pull-ups, moments that feel reckless until they drop clean through the net. From Anywhere doesn't exaggerate that reputation, it reinforces it. And when a slogan aligns that closely with truth, it sticks. That's why the campaign didn't stop when the commercial ended. Almost immediately, people began recreating it. Shots from parking lots, sidewalks, driveways, empty gyms. Social feeds filled with clips tied back to the same question: can you make it from here? The idea invited participation instead of passive viewing. It turned the audience into part of the story, which is exactly how cultural moments sustain themselves. This is where Nike's experience shows. They understand that real impact doesn't come from telling people what to think, it comes from giving them something to do. From Anywhere gave fans permission to test themselves, to imitate, to tag, to share.
It blurred the line between marketing and play. That doesn't happen when a brand plays it safe or rushes a concept out the door. When you contrast that with Aja Wilson's commercial, the absence becomes obvious. There's no phrase echoing in the background, no challenge circulating online, no clear idea for fans to pick up and carry forward. One campaign was built to spark imitation, the other was built to exist briefly and move on. And that difference explains why one spread naturally, while the other faded almost as soon as it aired. Once the From Anywhere campaign started gaining traction, the historical parallel became impossible to ignore. Nike didn't just echo Michael Jordan's legacy through subtle creative choices, they anchored the entire rollout to it. The December 25th release date wasn't a nostalgic Easter egg for hardcore fans. It was a deliberate alignment with the most important origin story Nike has ever told. Back in 1985, Michael Jordan's first Christmas commercial wasn't framed as a victory lap, it was framed as a beginning. At the time, Jordan was electric, but he wasn't yet a global icon. Nike didn't wait for certainty, they bet early, loudly, and creatively. That bet reshaped the company. The Air Jordan line didn't just sell shoes, it changed how athletes, culture, and commerce intersected. Everything Nike is today traces back to that moment. By choosing the exact same date for Caitlin Clark's campaign, Nike is signaling belief, not celebration. They're not honoring what she's already done, they're projecting what they think she can become. The message isn't subtle if you've watched Nike long enough. This is the brand saying they see the potential for a category-shifting figure, someone who doesn't just succeed within women's basketball, but expands its commercial ceiling. Of course, this is still projection. No campaign, no matter how well executed, guarantees that kind of impact. But brands at Nike's level don't invoke Jordan lightly. They understand the weight of that comparison. They understand the expectations it creates, and they only take that risk when they believe the upside justifies the pressure. That's what makes this parallel so revealing. It's not about comparing playing styles or championships. It's about how Nike is positioning Clark in the broader story of sports marketing. They're drawing a straight line from the most successful athlete-brand partnership ever to a player they believe can redefine the modern landscape. And once that context clicks, the campaign stops looking like clever advertising and starts looking like a long-term wager with enormous stakes attached. For all the momentum the campaign generated, there was one glaring issue sitting right beneath the surface. No matter how strong the messaging was, no matter how widely the commercial spread, there was nothing for fans to actually buy. No signature shoe on shelves, no product to anchor the moment, just anticipation, building in real time with nowhere to go. Reports suggest Caitlin Clark's signature shoe isn't expected to release until late April or May of 2025. That creates a massive gap between hype and availability, nearly 5 months where attention is peaking without a clear way to convert it. From a marketing standpoint, that's risky. Holiday visibility is unmatched. Christmas Day is when excitement is highest and wallets are already open. Letting that window pass without a product ready raises questions about execution, even if the long-term plan is sound.
This is where the strategy becomes harder to read. On one hand, Nike may be intentionally playing the long game, using this campaign as a foundation rather than a sales trigger. Build the story first. Let familiarity and emotional connection grow. Then drop the product when the season shifts and attention refocuses. That approach can work, but only if the demand holds. On the other hand, there's a real chance this becomes money left on the table. Every viral clip, every recreated shot, every From Anywhere post is free marketing happening months before there's anything tangible to support it. Momentum is powerful, but it's also fragile. If too much time passes, attention moves on. Another storyline replaces it. Another athlete takes the spotlight. What makes this even more striking is that Nike clearly knew how big this moment could be. The budget, the scale, the symbolism all point to confidence. Yet the absence of a product introduces tension into what otherwise looks like a perfectly orchestrated rollout. It turns the campaign into a test, not just of Caitlin Clark's pull, but of Nike's ability to sustain hype without immediate payoff. And this problem doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Because while Clark's demand is being carefully stretched into the future, other athletes are watching how this plays out. Brands are watching. The league is watching. The way Nike handles this gap could quietly shape how signature deals are structured going forward and who gets them. What happened here doesn't stop with one commercial or one athlete. Moments like this ripple outward, especially in a league where visibility, investment, and long-term belief are still being actively negotiated. When a brand as influential as Nike makes its priorities this visible, everyone in the WNBA ecosystem takes notes: players, agents, sponsors, and competing companies alike. For athletes, the message is clear, even if it's uncomfortable. Market value doesn't just influence contracts, it dictates creative effort. It shapes how stories are told, how loudly they're amplified, and how much risk a brand is willing to take on your behalf. When one player receives a cinematic rollout tied to legacy symbolism, while another receives a minimal campaign, it reinforces the idea that performance alone isn't the deciding factor. Attention, reach, and projected influence matter just as much, if not more. For brands watching from the outside, this becomes a case study. Nike didn't just promote Caitlin Clark, they reset the bar for what a true franchise-level WNBA campaign looks like. That raises expectations across the board. Future commercials won't be judged in isolation anymore. They'll be measured against this moment. And when the gap in creative investment is obvious, silence becomes an answer in itself. There's also an optics problem that's hard to ignore. You can publicly champion growth, equality, and collective investment in women's basketball while still making strategic bets, but when those bets are this visible, they invite scrutiny. Fans stop listening to mission statements and start analyzing actions. They notice who gets the full rollout and who gets the short version. Once that awareness sets in, it doesn't fade. This moment may ultimately push the league forward, even if unintentionally. Other brands may see opportunity where Nike showed restraint. Other athletes may become more vocal about how they're marketed, not just how they're paid. And fans, now more attuned to the mechanics behind the scenes, will keep asking sharper questions about why certain stars are elevated differently. The WNBA market is still being shaped in real time. Decisions like this don't just reflect where it is, they influence where it's going. And by drawing such a clear line with this campaign, Nike didn't just enter the conversation, they shifted it. By the time you step back and look at the full picture, the conclusion becomes hard to argue. Nike didn't stumble into this moment. They didn't accidentally create a comparison. They made a calculated choice and let the results speak for themselves. Through timing, scale, and creative priority, they showed exactly how decisions are made when projections, not sentiment, drive the process. This was never about disrespecting one athlete to elevate another. Both Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson have earned their status on the court. The difference came down to belief about the future. Who Nike thinks can move product, command attention, and carry a narrative large enough to justify risk. One athlete was positioned as a long-term pillar, a face tied to legacy and growth. The other was treated like a box that needed to be checked, a commitment fulfilled without ambition attached. That distinction matters because it doesn't disappear when the ads stop airing. Once fans recognize the difference in creative care, it changes how every future campaign is interpreted. Every rollout will be compared. Every minimal effort will be questioned. Nike created a reference point they can't walk back, and now the brand will be judged against its own precedent. The bet itself may still pay off. If Caitlin Clark's signature shoe launches and delivers at the level Nike expects, this strategy will be framed as smart, forward-thinking business. The Jordan parallel will be praised as visionary rather than bold. But if it falls short, Nike will be left explaining why it so publicly built a hierarchy within its own roster. Either way, the landscape has shifted. Athletes are paying closer attention to how value is expressed, not just promised. Fans are seeing how branding decisions really work when money and power intersect. And once that awareness sets in, it doesn't fade. Nike showed its hand, not through interviews or statements, but through action. And once a brand reveals how it truly sees the future, the conversation never goes back to where it was before.